Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Juan Espinosa, Director of Student Success here at the UCLA School of Nursing. Today we have a presenter here from the UCLA Career Center. The topic of this presentation is Resume and Cover Letter Workshop for Nurses. I'll pass it over to Eddie.
Yeah. Hi, all. Thank you so much for having me today. I'll do my best to speak to folks on Zoom and then folks in the room as well. Um, but yeah, my name's Eddie Cleofe. I'm the Assistant Director of Master's Students with Graduate Career Services, which is part of the UCLA Career Center. So I've been working with clients from the School of Nursing since 2020, actually. So I've been working with folks for quite some time. Um, and yeah, I'm going to get into some of the sort of fundamentals of resume and cover letter for application processes. But if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in chat. For folks in the room, feel free to raise a hand. The session's being recorded, and you'll also get a copy of these slides. So take as many or as few notes as you need to. Cool.
Great.
Before we jump in, any questions?
Can you hear us well on Zoom?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Good. All right, so let's get into it. Okay, so when we're thinking about these two documents, right, resume and cover letter, what we're going to be talking about fundamentally is organization and structure, and then talking about content itself, right? So for the resume, that looks like sections and bullet points. In the cover letter, that's going to look like a 5-paragraph essay, for lack of a better term, and sort of how do you write a cover letter to be effective, right? So that's sort of what we'll be covering today. So let's get into it. So first off, what is a resume? Who is reading them? And why are they reading them? Anyone want to define what a resume is?
Can be history of your work experiences, education, any certifications you have.
Awesome. History of work experience, education, certifications. Anyone else want to add to that? No? Okay. All good. Fundamentally speaking, the resume is a focused summary of relevant skills and experiences for a specific role, right? It's not necessarily a comprehensive thing. It's not necessarily every single thing that you've ever done. It is a very focused, purpose-written document. It is read by multiple people, including some non-people, right? So it is going to be scanned by an AI tool, often called tracking systems or ATS, if you've heard that before. And then it's going to be looked at by people, and typically multiple steps of people, right? So typically the process is when you submit a thing cold, you upload the PDF of your resume in there. It'll be scanned by the tool, the AI tool, which will put you into a yes, no, maybe pile. That yes pile will then go to HR or TA, talent acquisition, who will then sort of do a scan of their own, and then create another yes, no, maybe pile. That yes pile will then go to the hiring manager or hiring committee, right? So it's going to pass through multiple scans, and with that in mind, it needs to hold up to different types of scrutiny, and we'll talk about how we sort of work that into the documents. And finally, there we go. The document is just read to decide who to interview, right? It's not a reflection of anyone's worth or experience or anything. It is just a functional document. So let's get into it. So that initial scan by an AI tool is going to happen in a matter of milliseconds, technically speaking. But when it's handed off to a hiring manager for the first time, they typically spend about 7 seconds scanning the document. And after that 7-second scan, you'll get put into another yes, no, maybe pile. And if you make it through that initial scan, then the document will be read with a ton of scrutiny, right? Where they're looking with a lot of attention. So the document needs to hold up to a really quick scan and needs to hold up to a deep read. Here's some formatting notes. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, just for the sake of time. But essentially what we're looking for is something that looks as boring as possible. That is so that the different tools that are used to scan these documents can parse them properly, right? So if you use something fancy from like Canva, sometimes the AI tools can't read the content properly. So we recommend something super boring in a PDF. All right, so what are the different resume sections that we might see? So first up that we're going to see is contact info. That's going to be at the top of the document. That is pretty standard. Below that, we'll get into what's called a profiler summary, which is the norm in nursing, whether you're a MECHAN or advanced practice. The profile and summary is pretty standard across the board. Next up, we'll get into education and then some clinical training, professional experience, skills, certifications. There's no hard and fast rules here, but over in the top right is sort of what I want you to walk away with, right? The section order should emphasize the most relevant information first, right? That's sort of the thing that organizes all of the content in the resume, right? Because these things are going to be scanned super quickly, the most important information needs to be as high up on the page as possible and as close to the left as possible, right? Because that's how people are like physically reading and scanning these documents. Let's see, so some tools and resources. Again, you'll get a copy of these slides, so you can check these out on your own time. I recommend checking out the UCLA GCS Master's Resume book, which has examples for nurses, but I do defer to the UCSF School of Nursing. There's some really, really excellent resources that I recommend checking out. In particular, and again, we'll get into cover letter later, but they have a good, what they call a dissected cover letter. Essentially, why is this information on this part of the page, which I think is really valuable to get into, which we'll touch upon today, but I think it's good to have their copy. Okay, cool. Oops. Okay, so let's jump into some strategies. Number one is that profiler summary, right? This is right after your name, the first thing they're going to read about you. So you want to make sure that you're leading with the most relevant content and whatever you're best at. So that could be achievements, skills, experience. This could be your sort of strongest traits as a nurse. But really the focus is on not necessarily selling yourself, but sort of connecting your experiences to what's most important for the job that you're applying for right now. Right. So these are not super fancy, right? They're pretty mechanical, not even sentences in some cases, right? But because this content is going to be at the top of the page and it's going to be basically immediately under your name, I think a good thing to think about is what do you want people to immediately associate with your name as a nurse? Right, which I think is a good way to think about what are we putting into the profiler summary section. And we have two examples down here. All right, so next up, writing the actual bullet points. What are we including here? So first off, the bullet points in a resume should be communicating achievements and strengths, not generic job responsibilities. Right. The reason being, if you can demonstrate your success in a thing, you demonstrate that you do the thing, right? Sort of by definition. So by including successes, you communicate the fact that you can do the work. All right. So one structure that can be helpful for folks is this XYZ approach, where X is an achievement, Y is a success metric, sometimes a number, and Z is an action, right? You're not necessarily going to include all three of those things or even all three of those things in that order. But when you're looking at a bullet point, is it communicating an achievement? Is there some evidence of success? Is there evidence of the thing that you did in order to achieve that success? Right? So what might this look like? Awesome. So for example, assisted with perinatal procedures, right? That's kind of a generic job responsibility that we might see. Here we're adding on assisted perinatal procedures and monitored patients' post-birth vitals in a 25-bed unit, right? It may not seem like a success, quote unquote, but providing that 25-bed unit demonstrates a ton of information to the person reading this, right? They get a really quick sense of scale. They get a very quick sense of your capabilities in a very concrete way. Next up, what are the actions that were taken, right? In this case, EMR stuff came up in the job description multiple times, and this was a good enough place for us to put it when I was working with this client, right? And if Epic or EMR shows up in the job description, it's typically a thing that they like to see somewhere in the bullet points. Cool. And then the order of things is going to be dependent upon what's the phrasing used in the job description. Right. So if monitoring patients' vitals is sort of how it's described in the job description versus assisting with perinatal procedures. The order of things doesn't matter as long as you're being sort of as responsive as possible to the specific job that we're talking about today. Cool. So that is that. And then, oops, here's another quick example if you want to take a look. But again, it is just including, can you demonstrate with a number, ideally, the fact that your work had an impact? And can you sort of communicate how you were able to make that impact? Is sort of what the XYZ approach is fundamentally about. And again, you don't need all three of these elements every time. You don't need them to be in this order. It's just sort of a helpful checklist. If you're looking at your bullet points, are you including some of these details? Because if you're not, you're maybe wasting an opportunity to demonstrate your work. Okay, some other things to think on in resume writing strategy are sort of the clinical details. And again, this is coming from UCSF. Even in just describing where you've done your clinical rotations, where you've worked in the past, you can communicate fit about sort of a patient population. You can communicate fit about a specific sort of context. So one could be setting, right? So were you working at a community clinic? Were you working at a giant urban hospital? Were you working at a big teaching hospital like UCLA? Were you working for a small nonprofit? Next up, patient populations. If you are working with specific populations and that's mentioned in a job description, that can be a detail that's really valuable to the people who are hiring, right? They're not going to include those specific patient populations unless that's a fundamental part of the role. Next up, any specific clinical issues that you were dealing with or seeing a lot of? Any skills and responsibilities that you want to highlight? And finally, what teams you worked with, right? The collaboration, teamwork, cross-disciplinary work, it's sort of described in different ways in different like hospital systems, but working with people who are nurses and not nurses is a fundamental part of the job, which you all know, but being able to communicate that efficiently in writing is an important aspect as well. Okay. Finally, or to sort of reiterate, quantifying of work. Including numbers is super valuable. One, because they stand out visually, right? The document is mostly letters. So when people are reading this thing, numbers are going to stand out just as a function of them being different. And two, they really do demonstrate scale, which is really important. So some things to think about when thinking about some quick numbers. And there's an article linked here that lists, I think it's like 60 things that you can sort of keep track of numbers wise. But some quick ones that I think people don't think of a ton: size of units, number of beds on a unit that you're working on, how big your care teams are, right? If you're collaborating with a really, really big care team with like 10 plus nurses and I don't know, 5 plus doctors, that's helpful to be able to communicate versus if you were one of 2 people who were sort of overseeing a unit, right? So those are important notes to take note of. And really recommend you start keeping records now, just because this kind of detail about your work disappears almost immediately, right? You can like get off of a shift and immediately forget like, oh, how many people was I working with, right? Or oh, I got to do this procedure for the first time, or I was able to help a patient in this way. That kind of stuff disappears really quickly in our memory, and like sometimes we can go back and sort of remember it, but that's often a stressful process. So recommend sort of keeping some records now. It's helpful for your resumes, helpful for cover letters. It's also super helpful for interviews, which we won't get into a ton today, but all of this prep work sort of serves that process as well. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. But I do recommend if you are struggling with resume writing or resume editing, give yourself really strict time limits, right? I think people will be like, oh, I have an hour, I'll work on my documents then. That's helpful if you feel good about what to do next. If not, that's an hour of like stress and avoiding doing the work typically. So I recommend that clients set a timer for 2 to 5 minutes and be like, okay, I'm going to update the section in those 2 to 5 minutes just to get you to produce something or to start editing. Because once you start that process, it's often much easier. Just something about that activation energy is really important. So again, we won't do the activity today in the interest of time, but I really do recommend if you're struggling with any of this stuff, give yourself a tight time limit and just try the task. Okay. So next up is resume tailoring. For the folks in the room with me, who's been told that they need to tailor their resume? Yeah, some nods. Who's been told what that means or how to do that?
So make it somewhat specific to the job and like the location that you're applying to.
Awesome, great. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that got picked up, but making it as specific to the job and location, right? So what does that look like mechanically? How do we do that? So typically what you're going to do is use the job description itself, right? The language used in the job description is a prompt. Your resume is sort of the response to that prompt. So I'm going to do just a quick run through here. But over on the left, we have the phrase like ability to collaborate with cross-department team members, right? Again, kind of a generic job description. I was working with a client and they had consulted with the hospital operations team, right? With humans, with some time, we understand that operations is a different department than nursing. So there's a sort of this implicit cross-department collaboration, but because it's not used in that, because it's not sort of phrased in that similar way, it can pretty easily get lost by an AI scanning tool or even a person scanning your document really quickly. Right. So now we're going to use the language from the job description to talk about that similar work. And then we're going to add in the achievements or numbers like we discussed with the XYZ formula. So that's the tailoring process. It can be time consuming, but it's also a very good way to prepare for an interview because you're sort of deeply thinking about your work in their language, which is, I think, really valuable. Let's see. Okay, so over on the left, we have some bullet points from a job description that a client was working with. Over on the right in the top was content from my client's resume, right? Used with their permission, by the way. Our services are all confidential. So if you're interested in working with us, everything that you share will be kept private, though I may ask if you have particularly cool examples to share in stuff like this. But anyhow, over on the right, we have that original resume content. Over on the left, we have those job requirements and the color coding. Those things all clearly speak to one another, right? Doing a quick read of those things, it's those responsibilities and the resume content like all make sense together, but they're phrased differently, right? So here's what like the tailored process may look like, or the tailored version may look like. Again, it can feel kind of silly and redundant to go through this process. And we can talk about, we'll actually talk about, I think in the next slide or two, using generative AI tools to do this. It's very okay at it, like very okay, very adequate. We have to check its work, but we'll get into how to be strategic about that. Yeah, so that's the tailoring process and what that might look like. Yeah, so next up with AI tailoring. So you can sometimes get good enough results from a single prompt of like, hey, can you tailor my resume to this job description? If you ever copy and paste your resume content into ChatGPT or any of these tools, make it anonymized, right? So you don't need to give them your real email address or phone number or name. It can be Bruin University instead of UCLA. It can be Bruin Hospital instead of Ronald Reagan. Just for we are not clear as to what happens to all the information that we enter. Sometimes you can get good enough results from like, hey, can you tailor this to this job description? Often you'll get a ton of word salad or stuff that makes kind of sense, and it requires quite a bit of editing. What we found to be more efficient for our clients is to do basically a multi-prompt method where you add the job description to the tool, and then you prompt it to identify like 15 or 20 key skills or phrases that are important for this job. And then you ask it to update your resume with those key skills that it's already identified. Something about breaking down that task just seems to get better results, which I think makes sense intuitively. But no matter what happens, please, please, please check the accuracy and language of the results. It can come up with some wild stuff. But this can be good if you are sort of in the tailoring process and you've just been doing a lot of it and volume-wise. it can be a helpful tool for that. There are some other tools on the market. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, that are like allegedly designed to do this tailoring process. They're all kind of a mixed bag, because they've all been trained on different types of data. So I don't have a strong recommendation besides, if you use one of these tools, make sure you're checking what it produces. Yeah, but again, sometimes the editing process is easier than the writing process. So having it produce text and then editing it yourself can be easier than trying to write from scratch. Um, Also, really, really recommend hand tailoring. So that's sort of the manual process of doing it yourself, because it's free interview prep, right? So if it's at a hospital or clinic that you're really interested in working with, or if it is just a job that you're really, really interested in, I do recommend doing that hand tailoring, because you're preparing to write and talk about yourself in a way that's going to be resonant with this audience. Okay, and yeah, just some example prompts of what that might look like. Right, so it's again pretty simple, just telling it based off the job description, create a list of keywords that are important to hiring managers, give me 15 of them, and then can you integrate these 15 into the resume below. Cool. Okay, and then again, I will great, right on time. So for resumes, again, condensing things down to one page can be a lot. Things that often pop up as mistakes are including irrelevant experiences, right? So if you have worked in non-medical fields before, it may make sense to include that if you don't have more relevant content, right? But if you do have more relevant content, if it makes sense to use experiences from your clinical training for one entire page, then it may not make sense to include stuff that's coming from working in like retail or food service. However, if you were managing people or training people in food service or retail, or if you were running complex operations and helping out with efficiency things in retail and food service, it may actually make sense to include that below the clinical information, right? So we always want to make sure that we're emphasizing the most relevant content first. And if we have enough relevant content that we don't need to sort of add from outside, that's okay. But if we do include that, thinking about which parts of the experience are actually relevant, right? So for the food service stuff, the food is not important. It is the management, right? It is the operations, it's the organization. And similar with retail, right? What you're selling actually doesn't matter all that much. It's the teamwork. It is the operations. It is the organization, right? So only including what's relevant, even if it was like not even half of your job, even if some of the operation stuff was like something you did on the side when you had extra time, if that is most relevant and resonant, that's going to be the bullet point that you include. Cool. And then again, listing responsibilities versus your contributions, right? If you're not focused in on your achievements and ideally some numbers, then you're basically just giving them no information to work off of, essentially. Okay, so that's the resume. Are there any questions there? Nope. Awesome. Okay, then I'm going to jump into cover letter. Yeah, so kind of similar to resume, what is a cover letter? If anyone wants to.
Be more specific to the job itself that you're applying to.
Yeah, so it's a document that's sort of responding to a specific job.
This is like an area where you can elaborate more.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So for folks on Zoom, it's a document where you can elaborate more, and really we think of it as connecting the dots, right? The resume is kind of an overview of your work. The cover letter allows you to provide narrative examples of your work, right? So the resume really gets into an overview of like what skills and experience you have. The cover letter allows you to communicate stories about your work being impactful. And it's much easier for people to remember stories than it is for them to remember bullet points, just because of how things work. Okay, and again, format, won't get a ton into this for the sake of time today, but the most important piece for the cover letter is that the heading, right, your contact information and stuff, is identical to what you put on the resume. So basically it feels like you have like letterhead. So things just feel kind of like cohesive and professional. Yeah, okay, so that's cover letter. And structurally speaking, I don't know quite how else to describe this, but the cover letter is a 5-paragraph essay of you have an intro paragraph um, that starts with, "Hi, here's the role that I'm applying for. Here's how I found it." Mentioning any referrals. So if you know someone who works there, saying that, and then closing with what is essentially a thesis statement, right? Of like, I believe my strengths in X, Y, and Z make me a strong fit for the role. And then you have a body paragraph about X, a body paragraph about Y, and a body paragraph about Z, and then a closing paragraph. That's, thank you so much. Here are my skills again. Here's how they linked to both the job and the organization, and look forward to speaking with you. Again, it can be pretty formulaic, but the body paragraphs are really the most important piece. And thinking about the documents and how they fit into the selection process. Those resumes, right? They're going to pass through a lot of hands and they're going to be read a lot. People aren't going to read a cover letter unless they're already interested in the resume, just because reading is hard nowadays. So people aren't going to sort of closely read a bunch of text unless they're already interested in the candidate, right? So the cover letter should be introducing new information, right? Because it's a complementary document to the resume. So what might this look like? Oh, yeah, and again, the UCSF School of Nursing's career resources, they have a very good dissected cover letter that I recommend checking out. Okay, so coming back to this job description from earlier, we have independent decision-making abilities, collaboration with more senior members of your care team, and performing job duties with sensitivity and attention to age and developmental achievements. Again, this is based off of a job posting that a client was working on a few years ago. So with that in mind, right, we are going to want to speak to those things of working sensitively and ability to collaborate on a team. Right, we identified those two things in the job description, and this person has some stories in mind that speak to those strengths. Okay, so the body paragraphs are where things get more interesting. Again, the body paragraphs, you're sharing detailed but anonymized information about a specific instance, right? This is not a good time to say, like, oh, I work really well with patients. Prove it, right? It's very show, don't tell. Can you share a story where you were working sensitively with pediatric patients? Can you share a story where you collaborated really well in a team? And one way to do that is just sort of being intentional with the structure of your writing. And we recommend using the CART framework, which we'll get into on the next slide. But if you've ever Googled like how to prepare for an interview, there's star, start, car, cart, Carl, heart, par with 2 R's. It's all the same. They're just different structures for telling stories. We found that in writing, CART is one that works pretty well. So what does that mean? So CART is asking for context, right? What role were you in and what were you working on, or what situation was your patient in? Action, what did you do to achieve positive results in that situation? Results, how did you positively impact your team? How did you positively impact patient outcomes? How did you positively impact patient or family experience? And then T is takeaway, cares, right? Why are you telling me this story? It's being super explicit of, hey, here's the story that demonstrates a strength of mine, and here's how I'd use that strength on your team. Right, and then we'll go back to the example and we can see what that looks like. Oop, my bad. So from this example, and it's color coded according to the CART up top, and this is by no means a perfect example, but I think it does a good job of demonstrating the structure, right? Sharing 1 or 2 sentences to answer each of those parts of the prompt, the context, the action, the results, and then the takeaway or tie-in. Yeah. So again, by no means like a perfect example. I don't think there are perfect examples. but I think it does a good job of showing off how the structure is efficient, right? It's just one or two sentences for each of those things. And the amount of information about each of the stages of CART, they don't need to be equal, right? In this case, a lot of context was necessary for telling this story. And the results are one sentence. And that's okay. But essentially, if you answer or if you sort of spend one or two sentences on each of CART, you basically have a body paragraph that's ready to go. Here's another example. Again, a shorter story ultimately. But it is, I think, another good example of how the structure can be efficient and effective because the cover letter is almost always going to be one page, right? So you have to fit in a lot of information in a small spot. So just making sure that you're including information in an order that's easy to scan, but is still communicating detail, is still communicating really interesting content that demonstrates the value and impact of your work, right? And again, this is also interview prep, right? As you're writing these stories, you are preparing for questions like, oh, can you tell me about a time when you collaborated on a cross-disciplinary team? Or can you tell me about a time when you went above and beyond for a patient? Can you describe a time when you had conflict with someone on your care, on a care team for a patient? All of those questions you're also preparing for when you're doing the cover letter writing. So again, won't do the activity today just for the sake of time. But yeah, making sure that you're choosing specific instances to write about, right? I think one thing that people often do with cover letters is speak pretty broadly. And we're looking for specificity here. We're looking for individual incidents with a patient, individual patients that you worked with closely. People are looking for concrete examples of the work. Otherwise, you're not actually communicating anything, right? If you're speaking in generalities. Okay. And then the closing paragraph, super mechanical. Thank them for their time. Basically restate what are the strengths that are important, and then leaving them with confident last impression. I look forward to meeting with you, something similar, right? So the resume is going to be read first in almost every instance, even though it's called a cover letter. It's called a cover letter because of the age of the fax machine, where it was the document that was on top. But we've kept the name for reasons unknown. So it's called a cover letter, but again, it's not going to be read closely unless they've already read your resume and are interested in you. So it'll likely be one of the last things they read from you. So going out with that confident last impression is just as important as sort of the resume's impactful first impression. Cool. And then a strategy for cover letter writing. We call it the modular cover letter template. Essentially, you write an extra long cover letter, right? Instead of 2 or 3 examples, you write 4 to 6 examples. And if you do this once, then you can use this cover letter template kind of for the rest of your career, right? Because then you're basically just choosing what are the strengths that I want to communicate in this particular cover letter. And you can pretty easily, quote unquote, write a new cover letter that feels really tailored and really personal to the job that you're applying to, but you didn't have to do any original writing, right? Which I think people often get caught up with. Yeah. Let's see. And then linked out in this is just a simple spreadsheet template for writing out CART stories, which again, really recommend doing for the cover letter writing, but for interview prep. It is probably the best use of your time when you're doing interview prep is breaking down these stories, because identifying a story that responds to a question, structuring it and delivering it in real time is really difficult to do because interviewing is like a really artificial way of communicating, right? It's not a natural way that people tend to think or talk. So doing some prep is helpful there. Okay, so some cover letter mistakes that we see include being redundant with a resume. Again, the document is going to be read typically after a resume and only if they're already interested in the candidate, right? So with that in mind, it's a complimentary document. You should be introducing new information. And this is one of the reasons why AI is so bad at writing cover letters. Um, just as a function of how the tool works, it can't include sort of new, specific, true information, right? Because it's going for the average of things, or the most likely of things. So again, I think generative AI tools, if you use them, can be helpful for resume stuff. They're not great at cover letter writing or editing, really. Just because the cover letter is it's supposed to be a demonstration of your work and its impact and sort of in your own voice. And again, needing to share specific examples is sort of the challenge of the cover letter. Otherwise, you write a thing that doesn't have a ton of substance. Again, the idea here is to communicate with a couple of stories what makes you a valuable addition to their team. Oh, and then finally, not including a cover letter at all. You'll sometimes see cover letter optional. Typically, that's not the case. It's kind of a weird practice. I think it's actually a bad practice. But some places will sort of say optional cover letter as a screening tactic of like, oh, if they're not willing to put in a cover letter, why would we want to talk? Which I think is silly. But also a cover letter is one of the important differentiating factors between similar candidates, right? If you were going up against someone who has sort of similar clinical training, similar experiences as you, if you can tell a better story about your work, it is easier for you to be remembered in the deliberation process. So yeah, my boss often says like no one gets hired because of a cover letter, but it can be helpful in making that distinction between similar candidates. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Nope.
We do have some questions that were submitted with the RSP form. So I guess we can go over those. They pretty much sound the same. The first one is, in a pool of great applicants, how can I stand out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for folks on Zoom, how do you stand out in a pool of good candidates? A couple of options. The most important one is knowing someone, right? Every single field is network based. We're we're humans, right? And people want to hire humans that they know or want to hire people that they sort of are in network with, right? So if a friend of a friend or if a UCLA alumni works there and you met with them because they were a year or two further than you in their career, that is a huge differentiating factor, right? So there are different ways to sort of make those types of connections, but what I think is most efficient for people is identifying UCLA alumni who are doing work that's really interesting to them. And different ways to do that, I can send in the email wrap up different ways to use like LinkedIn to identify people. But yeah, having some sort of personal connection or relationship with someone inside the organization is one of the strongest determinants of standing out.
Thank you. For another question, I think you might have covered it already. But the question is, what makes a good cover letter?
Yeah, good question. I would like to reiterate because they're terrible documents. They're again pretty bizarre. They're a holdover from the age of the fax machine, but specific stories that demonstrate what you'd be contributing to their team is what makes a cover letter a good cover letter.
Good. Thank you. And then for another question, is it appropriate to include clinical experience from nursing school in a resume? If so, what content would you suggest including that's actually substance and with some substance and meaning?
Great question. Actually, let me pull up an example really quick. Oops, sorry, one.
Oh.
Okay, so again, linked out in those resources was the master's resume book. So sorry for folks who are on Zoom. I'm pulling up a resource really quick. So
Ooh, this is helpful.
yeah, so this is coming from our master's resume book, which has examples of resumes next to job descriptions and sort of gets into why are we making specific decisions in structure and content. Um, yeah, so I think this might be very small to look at, but um, this is one way to talk about your clinical rotations or your clinical training, right? For folks, particularly if you're early in your nursing career, that's going to be the most relevant content, right? So you're going to basically write in structure, or you're going to structure the writing about this to look identical to like full-time work, right? Because it's the most relevant and valuable stuff. And you'll see that this person included selected RN clinical rotations. That's because the labor and delivery stuff, which is most relevant for the job that they're going for, is not their most recent clinical rotation. Right. So they've sort of done this selected RN clinical rotation section so they could pull the three that were most relevant to the job that we're talking about today. And then you'll see under there's other RN clinical rotations where
Oh, cool.
these rotations, though important, are just not the most relevant for the particular job that we're talking about today. Right. So you can see that the nephrology stuff is what they're working on now, but the L&D is really what's important. So that's one strategy for making sure the relevant content for a particular role is showing up sort of as high up as possible. And again, writing about your clinical rotations in the same level of detail as everything else is sort of the best way to make sure that it is substantive.
Mhm.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah. What tool is this one? The one that you're showing us?
Yeah, so this is the master's resume book coming from my office.
Oh, wow.
If you go to career.ucla.edu and search master's resume book, it should be the first thing that pops up.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. You can also just click on the master's blue tab, and then if you scroll down, keep going, that master's resume book right there. Yeah, and then let me drop the link in chat for folks on Zoom.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Any questions on Zoom?
Question about I guess the job. You mentioned something, for example, if you were a manager at a restaurant or something.
Yeah.
What if that was like many years ago? Would you still include it, or what is like I guess the proper time frame to include, your past jobs?
Yeah, great question. So for folks on Zoom, like, is there a time cutoff for things? I think it's sort of the base of that question. No, right? So ideally, the stuff that's on the resume is the most relevant and most recent stuff. That's the ideal. But there can be times where something from earlier in your career could be really valuable to share, right? So something that I see often with nurses is if there was a specific volunteer thing that they did, maybe as an undergrad, that was working with a specific population, that's super duper relevant for a job that they're applying to. And it's like, oh, that was like 5+ years ago. You can definitely include that in a like selected section, right? Just so you can bring up the most relevant pieces. Yeah, good question. Yeah. It's sort of that balance of recent and relevant that we're going for, but ultimately relevant is more important than recent in most cases. Yeah, good question.
What's your advice for creating a profile on the resume? Because some resumes include it and some others don't. What would be your advice?
Yeah, good question. So it's been the norm for the past few years for like that profile section or that summary section for nursing. That's sort of been the norm. I don't know if I've seen a big change in that, but things are kind of always changing in this space. Again, I think what you really want to do there is make sure that you're including the most important keywords, right? This section is literally next to your name in many cases, and it's going to be the first thing that anyone looks at, right? So when people are looking at resumes during that scanning process, that people or that we were talking about, they do what's called F scanning, like the letter F. So their eyes will start at the left side of the page, and if they see something interesting, their eyes will dart across, and then they'll come back to the left side and sort of scoot down. So that's why it's called F scanning. So making sure that we're including important information toward the top of the document and toward the left of the document is important.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you know of like specific websites or like AI tools that you suggest using?
Yeah, great question. So are there any specific tools that we recommend? So my office doesn't have any like official recommendations. Unofficially speaking, a couple of options that I've seen be effective for people in certain circumstances. So JobScan is pretty good. I think it's jobscan.co nowadays. It's actually a tool that's been around for quite a long time. And I think it's most effective at doing the tailoring and like matchup process. That was sort of how they originally got started, of like you could upload your resume and upload the job description and it would give you a score. You're not going for like 100% match, but I think JobScan sort of pre-AI had the best tools, and post-AI seem to still have pretty good tools. There's also what's called tealhq.com. They have a couple of different tools. They have a really good job tracker. So if the search process is sort of overwhelming or stressful, I really recommend taking some time with some like project management-y stuff with it. And I think TLHQ is a really good option. So it has that job tracker. It also has a tool kind of similar to JobScan where it'll compare your document to a job description. So they also have like an AI resume generator that's very whelming in its results. But I think what it is very good at is sort of that JobScan-esque thing of like, how do these things match up? Where do they not match up? And then sort of hand tailoring there is I think sort of the happy medium of using the tools. But yeah, good question. Yeah.
I noticed, for example, some of the bullet points are like 2, some of them are 3. Do you recommend like keeping it consistent for each job description? And like, what's the range that you think it's like good?
Yeah, so great question. So this is talking about number of bullet points per role, right? The most relevant content is the most important stuff, right? In some cases, you can have, for example, for my job, the resume that I put together for the job that I'm currently in, I had one role that had 11 bullet points and another role that had 2.
Okay.
And that's just a function of what was most relevant for the job. So I think people want everything to be like balanced equally, which I think makes sense visually. But again, content is typically more important. So going with the most relevant content first. Well, yeah. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Can we schedule like one-on-one appointments with you to go over?
Yeah, yes. So you can schedule one-on-one appointments with me, or someone on my team. I'll drop the link in chat. Like, but yeah, so you can make appointments via Handshake. And they are 30-minute appointments, up to once a week, depending on availability. And we can work on resume cover letter. We can talk about job search project management of like, how do I organize my time? How do I make sure that like I'm keeping up with this stuff? We can talk about interview prep. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm working with quite a few nurses at the moment right now, actually, with like nursing residency interview prep, for example. And then we can also talk about negotiation. So if you get an offer that you're excited about but want to ask for more, learning how to do that is tricky. So we can talk about that, and we can also talk about, hey, I started this job and I'm butting up against I don't know, a supervisor who is not super supportive. Do you have any strategies there? So kind of start to finish in the job search professional development process. You're welcome to bring those questions to us. And yeah, so I've been working again with folks from School of Nursing since 2020. A lot of changes happened in those years, as we all know. But yeah, it's been really great supporting nurses as they sort of start or further their career. So please take advantage. You pay for our services via your student fees, so please get your money's worth out of us. I think you pay 0.00 or 0.0007 cents of my salary every quarter. So go off, get your money's worth. Yeah, and if you have any questions, again, I'll drop my email in chat. It is typically faster to go straight to Handshake if you want to schedule an appointment with me. But if nothing if the times that are available or that are posted on Handshake aren't a good, don't work for you, feel free to email me and send me your availability for the next couple of weeks, and we can go from there. But yeah, still, it's typically just faster to go through Handshake, because we don't have to do the email back and forth.
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much.
Please,
Thank you, Eddie.
yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us.